Good morning to each one of you. Shane is going to get a handout your direction so you can follow along. I'm curious, how many of you here are a part of leadership in some way for the ministry that you're connected with or representing? So some leaders or have some responsibility, okay? How many of you are here and would describe yourself as a helper or a volunteer or a worker, whatever that term is? Both of the, yeah, I know, leaders are putting both your hands up, but just wanted to get a sense. I'm thinking primarily today in this workshop about the opportunities that leaders have in the ministries and organizations that we serve. So that's what we're going to focus on, and looks like most of the crowd will connect with that. There may be a couple things that you as a leader say, man, wish my volunteers would hear that. And if you're here as a volunteer and not really responsible to lead anything, you might catch yourself saying, man, wish my leaders would hear a little bit of that. So I think you'll all be good. Shane asked me to introduce myself just a little bit further. I had the privilege of being in school, teaching, or administration for about 21 years. Some here locally where I grew up in Ephrata, at Ephrata Mennonite School, Pleasant Valley Mennonite School, and some in Grenada, West Indies with Olive Branch Mennonite Mission. And now working, as Shane said, in our district of churches. So I have a wife, Jennifer, and 5 children, ages 6 to 16. My 16-year-old just completed week 1 of successfully driving on license. So far, so good. Yeah. Couple of questions to get you started today. And I'm just going to move off to the side here so I can keep my eye a little bit on the screen when I need to. Why does it seem like I'm the only one that cares what happens around here? Did you ever ask that? Or why am I the one that has to answer all the questions and deal with all the problems? Or why do things fall apart and not get done when I'm around? In other words, if I'm not here, things don't happen. Or why don't other people prioritize this ministry like I do? Don't they see my example? Don't they realize how much there is to do? And why can't we work together better? If you are asking those questions, I would suggest this morning that the answer to all of them is the exact same answer. And the answer is your team is not connected to your vision. Now, do you see a question up there that's yours? You don't have to tell me which one, but have you ever asked any of those questions? Found yourself maybe your own version of that question? Maybe it was a little harsher or a little shorter or a little more colorful language. Those questions are questions we wrestle with. And this session is to think about how to connect a team to your vision so that you can achieve the vision. That's why you have a vision, right? You want to get something done. You want to see something happen. How do we connect our team to that vision? So the focus of this workshop is not on how to design a vision. I'm going to assume that you come already with some type of purpose or vision. And I know there are a lot of buzzwords that get thrown around when it comes to vision. A purpose statement, a mission statement, core values, vision, strategic objectives, and it can get confusing. But one of the ways that I found really helpful to think about all of those words is in this way. And I'm going to give you 3 words that make sense to me when I think about this idea of a vision. First of all, I like to describe vision as the future reality. And we'll see if this advances. The future reality. The vision is the future reality God's calling you to. So it's not what's currently true. That's how I think of vision. Where is it that we hope to be in 5 years or 10 years? The future reality. You also could call that the purpose or your purpose statement. Secondly, I think about the concept of mission. The mission then is the road that you're going to take to get to that vision or future reality. That's your mission if you're following along on your worksheet. That's the second blank there. And finally, if you have a destination you're aiming for and a road to take you there, you need a couple of guardrails and a couple of guidelines along the way. We call those core values. So if vision is your purpose, then mission could be your principles, and your core values could be your practices. Some other words that get used there as you think about mission, vision, and core values. Patrick Lencioni has written a book called The Advantage, and that's a great, in there he includes a great framework if you need to work at developing a mission. Like I said, I'm going to assume that we do have a purpose or a vision already in place. So what I want to do is talk about this connection to our team and connecting team to vision. And the first idea I want to give you, and we're going to move really quickly through the first three ideas because I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about them. We want to talk about the fourth one, which is the connection. But as you think about connecting your team to a vision, it needs to start with clarifying your leadership. Who is responsible to lead? What are their responsibilities and how are they accountable? If that's not clear in your ministry, it's going to be difficult to connect your team. Secondly, I want you to think about the second idea. Shane, you might need to advance there for me, is to confirm your vision. As you think about confirming a vision, this is where if you're here today and you're like, I don't really know what our vision or what our purpose is, we don't have one, then I would simply encourage you to plan some time and space to develop it. Pray and ask God what is on His heart. Who is it that God is calling you to? And finally, pick some resources or a book or a model or a resource person that can walk you through the process of developing a mission. So clarifying your leadership, and then confirming your vision, and then finally, the third idea is to communicate that vision. And Shane, you can advance there. Communicate the vision. And you do this through written communication, spoken communication, and you do it often. It's been said that when you are successfully communicating a vision, people around you are sick and tired of hearing it because you say it all the time. That's your clue that you're probably saying it enough. And sometimes I hear leaders, pastors say that, well, we told our congregation last week about that. Do you think I should say something again? Yes. Say it 2 times. Just keep repeating what it is you want people to catch. I worked for a time for a company where I believe it was every 2 weeks, we had a leadership team meeting, and the CEO started every single meeting the exact same way, repeating every 2 or 3 phrases. And I was like, oh yeah, here this comes again. Oh, yep, now there's that phrase, got it, yep. But you know what? Today, months after not being employed there anymore, a lot of those ideas are sticking right there. And his repetitive restating of the vision was so powerful. And so don't be afraid to repeat your vision. Do it often. Now, like I said, clarifying your vision, confirming it, go ahead, Shane, to the next slide, and communicating it are not the main focus today. We want to talk about that fourth bubble, which is connecting your team. You could spend a lot more time on any of the first 3. They could deserve their own workshop, but I'd like to focus this time on connecting your team to your vision. And I'm going to work our way through this by simply presenting a couple of ideas to you. These are not ideas that are all perfectly 1, 2, 3 steps that you can do tomorrow, but they're ideas that I think if you let inform the way you connect to your team, you will see some good fruit in the months to come. So the first idea around connecting your team to your vision is I would like to talk to you about communication. Communication. Now, there are many ways that we could discuss communication. There's tons of books written on communication. One of the side things that I enjoy doing with Rick Rhodes is what we call an Impact Communication Conference. Maybe you've heard about that. We teach communication and how to build a presentation. I did bring a few brochures along in the back if you're interested in more on that. But today, for our idea of communication, I would like to think of it this way. So the first idea, communication. This is how you connect your team to your vision. There are probably 3 types of people on your team. And Shane, you can go ahead and put all 3 of them up here, and then we'll talk about them. There you go. So there are storytellers. Those on your team, those in your ministry that are just constantly telling the story, repeating the narrative, how your ministry started, how you ended up here, telling stories about their students, their classes. They love to capture imagination. They love to convey emotion. They love to connect through stories. Who is your storyteller in your ministry? And what stories are they telling? Did you hear what happened to my 3rd grader the other night on the way to clubs? And you're like, yeah, I heard you tell that 5 minutes ago. And just constantly repeating the stories. And storytelling is an incredible way of communication. I love stories myself. If I can tell a story, I feel like I've communicated better. There are also, though, in your organizations, the statisticians. And some people communicate best through the data, the information, the percentages, the robust evidence, working with the number, the facts, the figures. Who is it that's always digging up the stats in your organization? Did you realize this is the 4th week in a row that we didn't have anybody from No-Show Street? Wonder if we should skip sending the van around there due to the price of gas, just cut back on some of the expenses. The statistician. That is how some people communicate. Now, the third one is the scientist. And this is the individual that loves the theory. Hey, how about if we would try this station model and have the kids all move around rather than staying in one place for the whole time? That was one from probably 10, 15 years ago. So the theorist loves to try new ways, new methods, is constantly about a growth mindset rather than a fixed mindset, loves to insert a hypothesis, an experiment, a prototype. What theories are being tested in your ministry? Now, communication with all these in mind, I would like to say communication is not what you've said, it's what people have heard. And I believe that's the next slide there, Shane. Communication is not what you've said, it's what people hear. So let's imagine that you, as the leader of your organization, are a storyteller. And that's your go-to. And you love to motivate people by telling another story about a student you met or a parent you ran into, and this is why we do this, guys. Well, if stories is the only way that you communicate, after a while, guess what? The statistician on your team is going to start to think you're a little full of hot air. Like, give me some facts here. Give me some data. Did that child really see it that way? Did that parent really say that? But if you're the statistician on your team and everything is facts and figures and data, and that's how you motivate your team, there are those on your team that need a little bit of emotional connection. Like, where are the stories? Like, is this all we're worried about? How many kids showed up and how much mileage we saved by doing the van routes a different way? Like, we need to consider these 3 ways of communicating so that there's connection. You can communicate just in your way, and then maybe painting in really broad strokes here, you'll hit 1/3 of your audience, right? So think about the different ways that you can communicate. And if you just are not a statistician, then that's a perfect time to ask the person on your team who is to chair a part of the meeting and develop some leadership there as well. Let those different ways of communication be a connection point for your team. That's the first idea. To connect your team to vision, you'll need to pay attention to communication styles. Let's move on to the second idea, and I call this the idea of maturity. And Shane, I'm going to go ahead and have you advance put everything on this slide right away, and we'll talk about it. 2 more, I believe, and just sit right there. Thank you. So as you think about maturity, I'm going to define maturity today as the balance between awareness and application. Or as Jesus said in Matthew 7, hearing and doing. Awareness and application. You can be aware, you can hear everything you want, but if you never get anything done, Jesus says that's not the wise man with a strong house that endures. So, as you think about this idea of maturity, let's start in the bottom left corner, status quo. There's not a lot of maturing happening there. That's where we're simply content, little action, little stimulus, no new ideas. Most of us would agree we don't even try to live there. We don't want to be there. Let's jump up top to the box about concept. Some of us are in this box, and it's a box that I find myself really at home in. This idea of concept, where I listen, I learn, I talk, reflect, I process, but I can end up getting killed by the 1,000 conversations that I'm in. And one of my weaknesses in leadership is thinking that if I wait long enough and talk to enough of people, the obvious decision surfaces and everybody sees it so obvious, and we don't have to make any hard decisions because everybody realizes, oh, duh, we have to do this. And I need leaders around me that are quicker to make decisions. And that brings us to the third box, bottom right. I need some people of instinct around me. The instinctive person is all about the action and the effort. They've got this can-do attitude, and they're not afraid of new things. Unfortunately, a can-do leader without some good thought can often be a one-generational leader. When the person with all the energy and ideas is no longer in the ministry, then the energy also leaves. And he or she can be the hero with 1,000 helpers, and no one ever really capturing the vision to take it to the next generation. Concept and instinct. Finally, we're looking to grow in maturity, where there's a legacy, where there's a multi-generational impact, and influence that goes beyond our lifetime and our span. Now, Shane, if you click one more, you should get a red arrow there. If you're naturally a concept person, you love the ideas, explaining the process, creating a new statement, a new policy, writing it all out, your journey to maturity will need to take you down into instinct before you can reach that maturity. You're going to have to find a way to put a little more action to your ideas if you're going to bring your team with you. And that may even feel, as it's labeled, the valley of the shadow of death. Like, you mean I have to actually do something? Yes, you have to just make a decision, take a risk, and blaze a trail. Now, if you go to the next slide, Shane, we'll also look at that, and you can click one more time. And you'll discover that if you're an instinctive leader, your valley of the shadow of death takes you through concept. You're going to have to actually write some things down. You're going to actually have to talk to some other people and involve them. You're going to have to be intentional at slowing down and allowing people to embrace your idea and not just pepper them with the third idea to help them understand the first idea, thinking that confuses them even further. So I like to think about that as maturity. And the idea of communication, the idea of maturity, those are two ideas that you'll have to give some attention to on your team as you build connection to that vision. You have to be aware, first of all, of your natural quadrant. Where do you most naturally work out of? Then you can build others around you who are from the other quadrant and help you see what that's going to look like. And once you figured out your quadrant, then start inviting your team to figure out theirs. And you might discover that your entire leadership team is all concept. And now you know why all the volunteers quit after 3 months, because no one's ever allowed to get anything done and build anything new. Or maybe you're all new and everybody, there's this high level of stress because there's no predictability to what you do next month from this month. So it really allows you to think about connection and how your vision is being understood. So communication, and then this idea of maturity. Let's go to the next one. And I would like to talk a little bit about training and how we do training. And I would like to give you 3 ways that training can happen. First of all, you see up there, education. And I want to think about this as the training that happens by listening, whether it's to concepts, to principles, whether it's attending a seminar, coming to urban youth workers retreat. We are educated by doing a lot of listening. It's a very great way, but it's not the only way to do your training. The second way of training is through equipping. That's where you get to watch or shadow an expert, and you're alongside of someone watching them and learning from them, seeing how they do it. That could be another type of training. And finally, the third bubble is this idea of experience. This is training by immersion, where you are dropped into the situation. There's firsthand engagement in an environment that you hope to create where you are serving. Immersion. Training and skills, hands-on opportunities, and the hands-on opportunity is only as real as the consequences are that you get to experience from working in it. So as you think about education, equipping, and experience, I'm curious, which one would you say we spend the most time in? Yes, back there. The education. Do you agree with that? Would you say we do a lot of teaching, asking people to do a lot of listening? I think I agree with you. And I'll tell you, one of the presentations I heard on this type of training, the speaker actually said that's 70% of the training we do. And then we do 20% experience and 10% equipping. And he said when you spend all your time asking people to listen, then you end up with either helpers or volunteers or leaders whose heads are really full, but whose hands are empty. And there's just not a lot of fruit, not a lot happening. We know it, but we've not let our practice catch up with our praxis. We've not left our, we talked about hearing and doing in the other slide. We've not left our application catch up to our awareness. So I think I want to encourage you to think about how do you onboard new people to your ministry? And if you're here in a children's ministry, how do you expect the children to learn? Is it entirely through listening to you, or are there ways that they can be equipped, and are there ways that they can experience what you are teaching them as well? So I think there's a little saying, Shane, if you take us to the next slide, you may have heard a version like this. There's 4 levels of teaching someone to do something. The first level is I'll do it and you watch. Second level is I'll do it and you help. Third step is you do it and I'll help you. And fourth step, you do it and I'll watch. And so those ideas education, equipping, and experience can kind of bridge those steps to that idea. I do think it's easy to put a heavy emphasis on education, and we love to teach. We hope people listen. But getting you to do is a much more effective way. It's incredibly powerful how much people connect to your vision when they're actually living it, extending it, and engaging with it rather than just hearing about it or seeing it on a poster or hearing you say it at the top of your meeting agenda. To connect your team to vision, create more training opportunities related to experience rather than education. The fourth idea, so we've talked about communication, maturity, and training. The fourth idea, to connect your team to your vision, I would like to talk a little bit about permission. Okay, I've got a little bit behind. There you go, Shane. Permission. As you think about permission, most ministries and organizations have a center. And by that center, I would like to describe that as the people responsible to make the decisions, or the people who carry the authority? So just think a little bit, who would you say is the center of your ministry or whatever organization you want to apply this to? There are people responsible to lead, responsible to make the decisions. We'll call that the center as we think about this idea of permission. Now, when Shane takes us to the next slide, I want you to notice the size of the gray shape. So go ahead, Shane. So it got larger, right? And if you flip back to the one before it, where did that shape's size increase? If you go back to the big one again. What got larger? What expanded? It was at the edge, right? The center didn't necessarily, you can't see the center grow, but the growth happened at the edge. It was the edges that expanded. So oftentimes, one of the challenges is where the center is, as growth happens and there's a further and further reach, the decisions are getting made further and further from where the actual change or growth is happening. And you may have something like, I remember being a missionary, and our board was 2,200 miles from where the mission was. And if you've been in that setting, I'll confess, there's times that we said, I wonder if our board understands what we're really facing, because they made that decision for us back there for us down here. And it takes some really good communication and conversation to not let there be lapses or misunderstandings in how decisions are made and where the impact happens. And so this idea of permission works at this to say, where is it that in the center we need to give permission for something to happen out at the edge? And I call that a prototype. Is there an opportunity, is it okay for a prototype to be tested in your ministry? If someone comes and says, hey, I had this idea, I was wondering if we could start reaching into, and they're the ones that have spent a few weeks building the relationship, they're the ones that discovered the opportunity. Does that decision, can they weigh in on that decision, or does it always go back to the center where there isn't the interaction with what created the opportunity? Okay, so thinking about where can we in the center give permission for something to happen at the edge that might expand the reach and the impact and influence of your ministry. The challenge is that when growth happens at those edges, or the margins we sometimes call it, whether it's new children or new volunteers, new streets, new families, there's a strong possibility that those making the decision in the center won't live with the impact of the decision out there. And so if you can give permission to those who will be impacted by the decision to make the decision, or at least help make the decision, you can really strengthen connection. Now you have someone that was working out here on the edge, and they realize, wow, I'm a part of what's going on. It's not just back there at the committee meeting that this gets decided. I actually had some influence in and the opportunity to talk about it and give input to that decision. Do you think they'll be connected now to the vision a little bit better, rather than thinking it's just something the leadership team talks about at their meetings? Yeah, for sure. So permission, prototypes, and the edges. What might that look like to have that discussion in your ministry? And we often think that addition is the way to go. We love it when our attendance goes from 100 to 200. We love it when we have 40 volunteers instead of 25. We can do so much more. Sometimes the edge and the prototype that you need to release is this opportunity for multiplication instead of simply adding and growing what you have. Would it be more effective in your town or city to have one huge children's ministry? Or would it be more effective to have 4 smaller ones, each in its own area, where people can spend a little more time living, working, moving into the community that they're trying to be a part of. Multiplication rather than just simply adding to the one that already is. Permission is a part of that. So communication, maturity, training, and permission. 4 ideas that I'm inviting you to wrestle with, to think about as you consider your ministry and how you can connect people to your vision. A number of years ago, my wife was reading the free newspaper in our town, and she saw this strange ad in the classifieds. If you have interest in God's work or skills in music, we have space. Call us. And it was over a time I was looking for a place to have a leadership retreat, like an off-site meeting, and she's like, Daryl, you should check this out. This is a really weird classified. So I called the number, and it was a dear old lady that answered. And she said, well, yes, are you interested? I was like, well, I'm just trying to figure out who I called. And she said, well, this is a church, and my pastor's at my house. Here, I'll put him on the phone. I was like, your pastor? Okay, well, hello. Oh, hello, so you're interested in our church. Well, I didn't know you were a church, but tell me about your ad. And he went on to say that they have about 8 people, and they need help. They don't have anybody to lead any music, and that's why they put the ad in. And he said, I think God's sending you to us to help keep our church open. And I was like, well, that would be unique, but maybe he is. So my family and I attended the next Sunday. Actually, it went 2 weeks. And we stood there in the auditorium with about 8 people. Some nice music started playing, and everybody stood, so we stood too. And I was like, oh, this is some nice worship music. And then after a bit, I'm like, wait, I think I recognize this song. And the song was, I'm Proud to Be an American, Lee Black's song. And everybody's standing, facing the flag. And I was like, wow, my children were like, Dad, should we sit down? Or what do we do? I'm like, it's okay, we'll just roll with this. Went on to learn that this church was formerly a Southern Baptist church that left that affiliation to be non-affiliated and now non-denominational, but had a Pentecostal pastor from Guyana, and they were meeting in a United Zion church building. So they believed that the Mennonites were who God sent their way to help them keep their church going. And so that started a fascinating journey of what does God want to do, and what in the world is this vision that God has, and how do we connect people to it? So I told the story. We'd spent about a year getting to know them, and the leaders in my district said, look, tell the story to our district of churches, see what happens. So I told the story, there's the storytelling, and said, look, if this story moves you and you're up for this challenge, I want you to sign up in the back and pray for 40 days. At the end of 40 days, anybody that's on the paper praying can come to a meeting, and we'll figure out what God's saying. There's about 40 people that signed up to pray, and about 30 people that came to the meeting, and 6 families that said, let's go for this. Everybody at the meeting said, God's giving me a green light, that's what I think we should do, or it's yellow with a little bit of green in, I think we should go for it. And so that started a process that took the edges of where we knew and understood church and left this prototype. How does a Mennonite church work with a Pentecostal pastor with a former Baptist church who doesn't want to be affiliated with anybody? That was a fun journey, a challenging journey, but God took us through it, and in giving permission to that planning team to begin working and connecting in the community, we were able to develop a vision for the church, and their vision is to be a church whose presence is felt in the community. So we don't just want to be another Mennonite church that anybody that's dissatisfied with theirs drives into town to attend. So they're pretty open at telling newcomers, hey, if you want to come here, you should move on the street. That's what we'd like to see, and they're just wrestling through that. And through that process, and doing a great job of passing on their vision by helping people understand what it means to be connected to it. So I encourage you to take one of these ideas and talk about it with your team at your next meeting, whether it's communication, maturity, or training, or permission, and think about how you can build those connections into your ministry. God bless you.